The silence began at exactly midnight Galactic Standard Time. No declaration of war. No diplomatic protest. No final speech echoing through the towering chambers of the Galactic Council. Just silence. Across 12,000 inhabited systems, every human communication beacon blinked out within the same heartbeat. Embassy lights dimmed. Orbital stations locked their gates. Quantum relays that had carried centuries of negotiations, scientific discoveries, and cultural exchanges suddenly transmitted nothing but empty static. The Council initially mistook it for a technical malfunction. Engineers rushed to diagnostics. Communication specialists flooded every frequency with priority signals. Automated translators repeated the same greeting in over 9,000 languages, each one disappearing into a void that answered with absolute stillness. The silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. It was organized. And somehow, that made it far more terrifying than any threat humanity could have spoken. Inside the Council's colossal Hall of Concord, a structure so immense that artificial clouds drifted beneath its crystalline ceiling, representatives from hundreds of civilizations exchanged puzzled glances. The hall had witnessed supernova treaties, galactic wars, and the birth of interstellar alliances, yet no one present had ever experienced an entire civilization simply vanish from conversation. Human delegates had attended every session without fail for nearly 2 centuries. They had argued passionately, defended weaker species relentlessly, and endured countless insults from older races who dismissed them as emotional newcomers. But now their seats stood empty beneath the white and blue Terran banners. Fresh cups of untouched tea still rested on polished diplomatic tables, as though their owners had quietly stood, walked away, and never intended to return. At first, many celebrated. They finally accepted reality, one elder counselor muttered with a smug smile. They've gone home to sulk. Perhaps they'll learn humility. Soft laughter rippled through the chamber, joined by relieved applause from factions that had long viewed humanity as an inconvenient obstacle to their ambitions. For years, the humans had opposed exploitation of frontier colonies, demanded equal representation for emerging civilizations, and refused profitable agreements that relied on conquest. Their absence cleared the path for policies that had been blocked for decades. Some delegates even proposed striking humanity from official council records entirely, convinced history would barely remember them. Yet not everyone celebrated. High Observer Sereth of the Averan Dominion remained motionless, his silver eyes fixed on the empty Terran seats. Something about the departure disturbed him. Humanity was impulsive, emotional, even stubborn, but never careless. They argued loudly. They fought fiercely. They defended their convictions with exhausting determination. Walking away without a single final word felt profoundly unlike them. It felt intentional. What if this wasn't surrender? Sereth asked quietly. Few bothered to answer. Beyond the panoramic windows of the council station, stars shimmered against the endless black of interstellar space. Freight convoys continued their routines. Civilian traffic flowed peacefully through glowing hyperspace corridors. The galaxy looked unchanged. Safe. Predictable. But deep beneath that comforting illusion, invisible currents had already begun to shift. Long-range listening arrays positioned beyond the Perseus Rift detected strange gravitational pulses unlike anything in recorded history. Ancient observatories orbiting forgotten dwarf stars recorded impossible fluctuations before falling permanently silent. Automated probes vanished one after another, their final transmissions reduced to fractured bursts of distorted light and whispers of impossible geometry. The reports arrived buried beneath routine bureaucratic traffic, ignored by administrators more concerned with celebrating humanity's departure than investigating distant anomalies. Somewhere far beyond the edge of explored space, something impossibly old had stirred. Not awakened by war. Not summoned by hatred. But by the absence of the one civilization that had been quietly standing watch. And while the Council congratulated itself on finally being rid of humanity, the Guardians had already left their posts. Humanity had not always stood alone. When Earth first crossed the threshold into the Galactic Council, its people arrived carrying hope instead of fear. Their fleets were modest compared to the ancient empires that ruled the stars, their history painfully short beside civilizations that measured their existence in millions of years. Yet the humans brought gifts no one expected, not weapons, but cures for diseases that had plagued isolated colonies for centuries, efficient fusion technologies offered freely instead of sold for profit, and agricultural systems capable of restoring dead worlds to life. They believed cooperation could accomplish what conquest never could. Their diplomats smiled easily, their scientists shared discoveries without demanding tribute, and their explorers volunteered for the dangerous frontiers that older civilizations preferred to avoid. To humanity, the galaxy was not a battlefield. It was a future waiting to be built together. Among those dreamers stood Admiral Evelyn Carter, though Admiral hardly captured the scope of her responsibility. She commanded the Deep Horizon Initiative, a mission unlike any military fleet in history. Its purpose was not expansion or war but observation, journeying into the silent regions beyond the Perseus Rift, where stars behaved strangely and ancient navigation charts simply ended. Carter had spent more than 30 years staring into the darkness beyond civilization, watching patterns emerge where others saw random noise. Every unexplained gravity wave, every impossible burst of radiation, every vanished probe became another piece of a puzzle that refused to leave her thoughts. Her flagship, the TSV Horizon's Promise, drifted quietly along the edge of known space, surrounded by an endless ocean of black illuminated only by distant stars. The silence there felt unnatural. Even the ship's crew noticed it. Veteran navigators whispered that space itself seemed to listen. Sensors occasionally detected echoes, signals repeating every few months with mathematical precision, yet originating from locations where no stars existed. Engineers blamed equipment errors. Astrophysicists proposed unknown natural phenomena. But Carter trusted neither explanation. One evening, she stood alone within the observation dome, watching distorted starlight ripple across the void. Her reflection floated faintly across the reinforced glass, merging with the endless darkness outside. She replayed the latest data stream for what felt like the 100th time. The pulses were changing. Slowly. Deliberately. Not random emissions, but intervals. Timing. Almost as though something unimaginably distant was counting. Her heartbeat quickened. Someone left this, she whispered to herself. Not a message. A warning. Back on Earth, Carter presented her findings before the Galactic Council's Committee for Frontier Exploration. Towering holographic displays filled the chamber with maps of distorted spacetime, gravitational anomalies, and reconstructed signal patterns. She explained each discovery with calm precision, never exaggerating the evidence. Ancient ruins discovered on abandoned moons all pointed toward the same region beyond the rift. Extinct civilizations, species that had vanished hundreds of thousands of years apart, had independently recorded nearly identical astronomical observations before disappearing from history. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Yet the chamber erupted with polite laughter. One elder delegate dismissed her presentation as human pattern obsession. Another joked that Terrans were seeing ghosts in empty space. Others accused humanity of manufacturing fear simply to justify increased exploration funding. The official report was archived, downgraded, and quietly forgotten. As Carter collected her data drives, she glanced one final time around the chamber. No anger crossed her face. Only disappointment. She had not expected everyone to believe her. But she had hoped someone, anyone, would recognize the danger hidden within the evidence. Outside the council chambers, humanity's delegation gathered in silence. No dramatic speeches followed. No public outrage echoed across the station. Only quiet understanding. If the galaxy refused to prepare. 3 years after humanity vanished from the Galactic Council, the first frontier colony simply ceased to exist. There was no distress call. No explosion visible across the stars. No declaration of war from a rival empire. One moment, the mining world of Keeler 9 bustled with nearly 8 million inhabitants beneath the pale glow of its twin suns. The next, every quantum beacon connected to the colony went dark. Cargo vessels approaching the system emerged from hyperspace expecting busy orbital docks and hundreds of navigation signals. Instead, they found silence. The planet still circled its star. The ocean still reflected sunlight. Cities still stood beneath the clouds. But every living thing, every citizen, every animal, every trace of biological life, had vanished without leaving behind bodies, wreckage, or even a single emergency transmission. It was as though existence itself had quietly erased them. The Council refused to believe it. Officials blamed sensor failures, pirate interference, even elaborate hoaxes designed to destabilize trade routes. Investigation fleets were dispatched with reassuring confidence, broadcasting promises that answers would soon be found. They never returned. Their escorts disappeared one by one after crossing the outer boundary of the Keeler system. Automated drones transmitted only fractured images before their recordings dissolved into streams of impossible geometric patterns that no computer could decode. Veteran captains watching the footage described the sensation as deeply unsettling. The images did not appear random. They felt alive. Then came another disappearance. And another. Within months, entire sectors along the galaxy's outer rim began falling silent. Merchant convoys vanished between routine jumps. Deep space observatories stopped transmitting. Massive listening arrays that had operated continuously for centuries suddenly emitted bursts of deafening static before shutting down forever. Insurance corporations collapsed beneath impossible losses. Refugee ships flooded safer regions carrying stories that contradicted one another yet shared one terrifying detail: the stars themselves no longer felt safe. Fear spread faster than information. In the Council's emergency chambers, diplomats argued through sleepless nights beneath flickering holographic maps where more and more systems faded from blue to crimson, then to black. Military leaders demanded retaliation despite having no visible enemy. Scientists searched desperately through forgotten archives, hoping ancient civilizations had documented something similar. What they uncovered chilled every soul present. Hidden inside ruins buried beneath dead moons were fragmented records translated from civilizations that had vanished millions of years apart. The names differed. The languages were extinct. Yet every account described the same presence. The null architects. Not conquerors. Not invaders. Harvesters. Entities so ancient that galaxies experienced their arrival like seasons. They did not negotiate because negotiation implied equality. They did not wage war because resistance barely registered against their designs. They simply arrived whenever intelligent civilizations became sufficiently numerous, and then entire stellar regions quietly disappeared. Most historians had dismissed the legends as mythology. Now they sounded like eyewitness testimony. High Observer Sereth stood alone inside the Council archives, surrounded by towering shelves containing the accumulated knowledge of thousands of species. His trembling hands rested upon an ancient crystalline tablet recovered centuries earlier from an extinct civilization. He remembered laughing when junior researchers first suggested the inscriptions represented historical records rather than religious symbolism. He wasn't laughing anymore. A single translated sentence echoed endlessly through his thoughts. When the Watchers abandon their stations, the silence follows. Watchers. His mind immediately returned to humanity. Their warnings. Their reports beyond the Perseus Rift. Their sudden disappearance without threats or demands. A cold realization settled into his chest. Humanity hadn't retreated because they had lost faith in the Council. They had left because they knew exactly what was coming. As panic engulfed the galaxy, emergency broadcasts flooded every known human frequency. Diplomatic encryption codes long unused were activated. Old ambassadors recorded personal pleas. Military commanders abandoned decades of pride and requested assistance. Only static answered. Earth itself had become a ghost. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Council understood that the civilization they had mocked might have been the only one that had ever truly understood the darkness waiting between the stars. Then humanity would prepare alone. The trail was never meant to be found. It existed only as a whisper hidden beneath the quantum noise of the galaxy, a faint distortion woven into hyperspace itself, so subtle that only civilizations facing extinction would ever think to search for it. After months of desperate analysis, the Council's greatest scientists finally isolated the anomaly. It was not a transmission. It was a breadcrumb. A carefully engineered sequence of microscopic gravitational shifts, stretching far beyond the forbidden expanse of the Perseus Rift. With every vanished colony and every darkened star system, the evidence became impossible to ignore. Humanity had not disappeared randomly. They had left a path, but only for those willing to admit they had been wrong. The emergency expedition departed under a silence far heavier than any military ceremony. A dozen surviving Council vessels crossed into regions that had remained untouched for thousands of years, their hulls trembling as hyperspace itself seemed to resist their passage. Familiar constellations disappeared behind curtains of distorted light. Navigation computers repeatedly declared they were lost, even while following coordinates calculated to impossible precision. Outside the viewports, reality behaved strangely. Entire nebulae bent around invisible structures. Dead stars emitted pulses matching the mysterious signals Admiral Evelyn Carter had once tried so desperately to explain. Every crew member felt the same unsettling sensation, that they were being watched by something ancient, though every sensor insisted the surrounding void was empty. Then the darkness opened. What lay beyond the rift stole the breath from every soul aboard the expedition. Hundreds of newborn stars blazed within an enormous artificial cluster that had never existed on any galactic map. Around them stretched colossal orbital rings wider than planetary systems, shimmering with energy fields unlike anything the Council had ever engineered. Vast habitats rotated gracefully around luminous suns, each one capable of housing billions. Fleets of elegant Terran vessels glided between impossible megastructures whose scale dwarfed even the oldest alien civilizations. Entire worlds had been reconstructed beneath protective shells of crystal and living metal. Rivers flowed through floating continents suspended above artificial oceans. Forests flourished beneath controlled skies where extinct species once again walked freely. Humanity had not merely survived. They had built a second cradle for civilization. A sanctuary. As the Council delegation approached, they expected defensive weapons to lock onto their ships. Instead, a comm transmission arrived. Permission to dock granted. No accusation. No triumph. Only quiet professionalism. High Observer Sereth stepped onto the station with a heart burdened by years of regret. Human civilians passed through broad corridors lined with gardens and sunlight streaming from engineered skylights. Children of dozens of alien species laughed together in open parks. Scientists collaborated beside beings whose homeworlds had already fallen to the advancing darkness. Refugees from forgotten empires worked alongside Terran engineers as though they had always belonged there. The Council delegates exchanged stunned glances. Humanity had not hidden alone. They had spent 3 years rescuing anyone they could reach without exposing the sanctuary. Then Admiral Evelyn Carter appeared. She looked older than Sereth remembered, silver now threaded through her dark hair, but her eyes carried the same calm determination that had once faced ridicule inside the Council chamber. "You found us," she said quietly. Sereth lowered his head. "We came to apologize." For a long moment, Carter simply looked through the observation window toward the distant stars. Finally, she spoke. "We never left because we hated you." Her voice remained gentle. "We left because staying together would have doomed everyone." The delegates stared at her in silence. Carter activated a holographic projection filling the room with ancient star maps recovered from precursor civilizations. Layer upon layer of extinct empires appeared across millions of years. Every one ended the same way. A sudden disappearance. A harvested galaxy. Then she revealed humanity's greatest secret. Decades before withdrawing from the Council, the Deep Horizon Initiative had deciphered an ancient warning hidden within the gravitational echoes beyond the Perseus Rift. The Null Architects did not merely hunt intelligent life. They hunted concentrated civilizations. A united evacuation of the galaxy would have produced an energy signature impossible to conceal. The sanctuary itself would have become the first target. Humanity had accepted being misunderstood, because being hated was a far smaller price than condemning every species to extinction. In that moment, the weight of humanity's silence became almost unbearable. Their departure had never been an act of abandonment. It had been the greatest act of protection the galaxy would ever fail to recognize, until it was almost too late. The first warning came not as an explosion, but as the disappearance of light itself. Across the outer reaches of the galaxy, entire constellations dimmed as though invisible hands were snuffing out the stars one by one. Astronomers aboard the sanctuary's observatories watched in horrified silence as gravitational maps twisted into impossible shapes. Space no longer behaved according to the laws they had spent centuries mastering. It folded inward, rippled like black water, and then, they arrived. The Null Architects did not emerge through hyperspace or wormholes. They simply appeared, immense structures suspended within fractures of reality, each one larger than moons, their surfaces shifting with patterns no organic mind could fully comprehend. They emitted no radio signals, no declarations, no threats. Their presence alone crushed fleets before a single weapon had been fired. Entire Council battle groups vanished into collapsing pockets of space, erased so completely that even their quantum signatures ceased to exist. For a terrifying moment, it seemed the ancient legends had spoken the truth. The harvest had begun. Inside the sanctuary's central command nexus, alarms echoed beneath vaulted ceilings of transparent alloy. Hundreds of holographic displays surrounded Admiral Evelyn Carter, each showing another desperate front. Refugee convoys scrambled toward defensive corridors. Engineers rerouted power from civilian districts into planetary shield networks. Scientists, soldiers, physicians, and volunteers worked side by side without panic, every movement guided by years of preparation. Carter stood perfectly still amid the chaos, studying the battlefield with unwavering focus. This was the future she had spent decades trying to prevent. Every warning ignored. Every report ridiculed. Every sacrifice accepted. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, fear never reached her voice. "They're following the predicted advance," she said quietly. The room fell silent. Phase 7. No one asked what that meant. Humanity had prepared for this day long before anyone else believed it would come. Deep within hidden hangars carved into artificial worlds, colossal blast doors slowly opened. One after another, immense Terran Guardian dreadnoughts emerged into the darkness. They were unlike traditional warships. Their hulls carried scars from years of relentless testing rather than glorious battles. Massive gravitational stabilizers glowed beneath armor forged around compressed neutron matter. Swarms of autonomous repair craft drifted alongside them like silent companions. These vessels had never been built to conquer civilizations. They had been designed for one purpose alone, to stand between extinction and everyone else. Across every communication frequency, Admiral Carter's voice reached not only humanity but every surviving civilization. "You believed we abandoned you." The first dreadnought entered combat. A wave of distorted gravity surged from the nearest Null Architect. Instead of retreating, the Terran vessel anchored itself in spacetime, deploying experimental singularity lattices that absorbed the impossible force before redirecting it harmlessly into empty space. We were buying time. Hundreds more Guardian ships emerged. Quantum probability engines activated in perfect synchronization, predicting enemy movement seconds before they occurred. Artificial stars hidden inside massive orbital arrays ignited simultaneously, flooding entire sectors with controlled energy bursts that disrupted the architect's mysterious manipulation of reality. Human engineers worked relentlessly inside burning reactor chambers to keep impossible machines alive. Medical crews rescued alien survivors without asking what species they belonged to. Civilian transport captains repeatedly flew into collapsing battle zones to evacuate strangers they had never met. The battlefield transformed. Not into chaos, but into purpose. Humanity had not relied upon a single miracle weapon. They had relied upon millions of ordinary people who had spent years preparing together. Then came the final strike. Every surviving Terran vessel synchronized through quantum entanglement, channeling the output of dozens of artificial singularities into one precisely calculated gravitational resonance. It was not powerful enough to destroy the null architects outright. It did something far more important. It forced them to become vulnerable. For the first time in millions of years, the ancient entities existed fully within normal space. That single moment was enough. Combined fleets from every surviving civilization, once divided by pride, politics, and prejudice, opened fire together. The darkness fractured. The impossible giants began to fall. As the last null architect collapsed into a cascade of fading starlight, silence returned to the galaxy. Not the silence of abandonment. The silence of survival. And in that quiet, every species finally understood what humanity had known all along. True strength was never measured by the size of a fleet. It was measured by the willingness to carry the burden of tomorrow. Long before anyone else believed tomorrow would come, the diplomatic vessel Radiant Accord entered the sanctuary under emergency power, its once proud silver hull scarred by battle and patched together with mismatched armor plates from half a dozen civilizations. One of its engines burned unevenly, leaving a fading trail of blue plasma across the artificial sky that surrounded humanity's hidden refuge. There was no ceremonial escort waiting at the docking ring. No military parade. No triumphant speeches celebrating victory. The station remained alive with quieter, far more important work. Rescue craft arrived every few minutes carrying exhausted survivors. Medical teams rushed through brightly lit corridors. Engineers repaired life support systems while children from worlds that no longer existed laughed together inside newly built gardens. The galaxy had survived, but survival was only the beginning. High Observer Sereth stepped slowly onto the station, his hands trembling around a small crystalline case containing the Galactic Council's official apology. Months had been spent drafting every sentence, debating every word, rewriting every admission of guilt. Inside the chamber behind him stood ambassadors from civilizations that had once mocked humanity's compassion as weakness. Some lowered their eyes in shame. Others carried gifts recovered from ruined homeworlds, ancient works of art, historical records, cultural treasures, offerings not of diplomacy, but of gratitude. None of them believed those gifts could erase the past. They had come because silence had become heavier than pride. The sanctuary itself overwhelmed them. Sunlight poured through immense transparent domes that simulated Earth's blue sky. Rivers flowed between neighborhoods where humans and alien refugees worked side by side rebuilding homes, schools, and research centers. Markets echoed with dozens of languages blending into one harmonious rhythm. Former enemies shared meals beneath towering trees genetically restored from extinct ecosystems. There were no districts divided by species. No monuments celebrating military victory. Instead, memorial gardens stretched quietly across peaceful hillsides, each tree planted in memory of a world that had fallen before humanity could reach it in time. Near one of those gardens stood Admiral Evelyn Carter. She wore no ceremonial uniform. Only a simple gray field jacket bearing the faded insignia of the Deep Horizon Initiative. Her eyes lingered on the young sapling swaying gently beneath the artificial breeze. Each represented lives she still carried within her memory. When Sareth approached, words refused to come. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, the elderly observer placed the crystalline case into Carter's hands. "We were wrong," he whispered, his voice breaking beneath the weight of years. "We mocked your warnings. We questioned your motives. We mistook your silence for contempt." His silver eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "And because of us, countless worlds paid the price." Carter looked at the unopened case but made no effort to examine its contents. Instead, she closed it gently. "You don't owe us perfection," she said softly. "You owe the future wisdom." Around them, workers continued rebuilding damaged habitats. Volunteers distributed food to families who had lost everything. Scientists collaborated across species to restore ecosystems devastated by the war. Life refused to surrender. Sareth looked around in disbelief. "You could have abandoned us." Carter's expression remained calm. "We considered it." The honesty struck harder than anger ever could. "But protecting people isn't something you do only when they deserve it." A long silence followed. Not awkward. Peaceful. The kind that exists after storms finally pass. Later that evening, representatives from every surviving civilization gathered beneath the sanctuary's central observatory. Through the vast crystal dome above them, the stars shone brighter than they had in generations. Entire constellations once hidden behind fear now glittered across the endless darkness. New exploration fleets prepared quietly at distant docks, not to conquer unknown space, but to help rebuild what had been lost. The Galactic Council formally dissolved its old hierarchy that night. In its place, a new alliance was born. One built not upon age, nor military strength, nor political influence, but upon shared responsibility. As the ceremony ended, Carter stood alone before the panoramic window overlooking the newborn stars beyond the Perseus Rift. She remembered the laughter inside the council chamber years earlier. She remembered presenting impossible evidence while others smiled politely and looked away. She remembered humanity leaving without a single farewell because words could no longer accomplish what action required. Behind her, the voices of thousands of survivors filled the sanctuary with hope. Ahead of her, an entire galaxy waited to be rebuilt. She smiled almost imperceptibly. The galaxy never needed humanity to be feared, she whispered to the stars. It only needed someone willing to prepare for tomorrow. And in the endless silence between distant suns, that lesson would echo far longer than any apology ever could.